A severe winter storm of formidable magnitude raged in the desolate Scottish Highlands. Miss Eleanor Hayes, her delicate frame defying the wrath of the elements,
is anyone there?
found herself caught in its embrace. For 70 unforgiving hours, she had traversed the treacherous terrain, a solitary figure in a storm-ravaged landscape. The mercury on her timepiece registered a chilling -20 degrees Fahrenheit, and the swirling snow obscured all but the nearest 10 feet of the world. Her faithful lone 115A3 long-range sniper rifle, a familiar weight across her knees, offered curious solace in this frozen purgatory. Then, faint yet insistent, the voices returned, whispers of distress, carried on the gale, grew weaker with each repetition. Eleanor's pale blue eyes, inherited from her late father, harrowed against the blinding white. She discerned a faint plea from the missing soldiers. Their lives, she knew with grim certainty, were now measured in fleeting hours. Only she, and she alone, could reach them. Her satellite communication device, a marvel of modern engineering, had failed the previous night. Its circuit succumbed to the profound cold below -40 degrees Fahrenheit. There was no recourse, no grand design for her extraction, no communication with her distant command. Only Eleanor, the formidable mountains, and instincts honed by a lifetime of peculiar education. "I am coming," she murmured, a promise made to the wind, though no soul was near enough to hear. At 20-1 years of age, her head stood barely 5 feet 3 inches, her dark hair tucked securely beneath a white thermal cap. Her slight build belied the 60 pounds of essential gear she carried. This improbable burden crossed terrain net with cruel indifference and had vanquished even seasoned special operations teams. Mission commanders had pronounced the task insurmountable, and yielding weather had grounded rescue helicopters. Even hardened special air service veterans deemed the conditions beyond human endurance. Yet, she moved like a wraith in the tempest. Her gloved hand brushed the worn brass of the compass, her father's legacy. The storm, in its capricious fury, brought magnetic anomalies. This made the instrument less reliable than her anxious heart desired, but it had never entirely failed her. Like her father, it never failed her until the wilderness within him grew too vast to navigate. The voice, a sigh of hope, called once more. With methodical grace, Eleanor checked her rifle, adjusted her pack. With a resolute heart, she turned toward the faint sound, a tiny figure against the enormous tempest. The snow, a deceptive shroud, concealed deadly crevices and sheer, icy drops. A single misstep would seal her fate. Yet, Eleanor moved with quiet confidence. She had long ago absorbed the profound truth survival wasn't a contest against nature, but adequate understanding of it, a seamless integration with the landscape itself. The year was 2008. The bracing air of the Shetland Islands, off Scotland's north coast, offered a stark, beautiful tableau. 10-year-old Eleanor Hayes knelt beside a freshly culled wild deer, her earnest gaze fixed upon her father, Mr. Arthur Hayes, whose rugged features bore the indelible lines of decades spent in Earth's harshest environments, demonstrated the art of skinning. His hunting knife, wielded with practiced economy, separated hide from flesh in long, clean strokes. "Observe, Eleanor, how I follow the natural seams," he instructed, his breath misting. "The animal, in its generosity, reveals where to cut, if one only listens."
My father
Eleanor,
used to say, patience is key.
her small hands mimicking his
in the
movements
cold.
in the air, nodded intently. Since she could walk, she had watched her father. She absorbed a wealth of knowledge most children of her generation, engrossed in electronics in school, would never encounter. While her peers played video games and learned fractions, Eleanor deciphered animal tracks, forecast weather from cloud formations, and navigated by the stars. "May I endeavor?" she inquired, a small hand reaching for the knife. Mr. Hayes hesitated, then, with a weighty sense of trust, passed the blade to her. His calloused hand enveloped hers. Remember, dear girl, to honor what the creature has given. No hasty cuts. No waste. Eleanor received the knife with reverence, usually reserved for sacred objects. Its blade, heavy in her grasp. She positioned precisely as her father had shown. She made a careful incision along the natural line, where the hide met muscle. Mr. Hayes, his blue eyes mirroring hers, nodded his approval. Excellent. Slow and deliberate. Haste is a perilous companion in the wild. Later, as they meticulously prepared the venison for the remote farmstead, Mr. Hayes fell quiet. Eleanor recognized this mood. It pretended a retreat into his past the years before he settled in the Shetlands, before her birth. Father, she prompted gently, sensing a rare moment of forthcoming honesty. Mr. Hayes secured the final meat package. Have I ever spoken to you of the Cairgnors? Eleanor shook her head. She knew her father served in the military, an elite Highlander ranger, but he rarely spoke of that arduous chapter. Mountains in the Scottish Highlands, beautiful and treacherous, like our own but with immutable laws. Mr. Hayes gazed toward the distant, snow-capped peaks. We were there before official acknowledgement of British forces in that region. 1996. My team, we called ourselves the Shadow Walkers. Eleanor's eyes widened, a new facet of her father's life unfolding. 6 of us dropped into territory where no British operatives belonged. Our mission remains classified to this day. Even now, I cannot recount every detail. His voice softened, etched with an enduring sorrow. We lost 4 men in a single night. Not enemy fire. Not in some dramatic skirmish like those in movies. What happened to them? Eleanor asked, her voice hushed. Mr. Hayes fixed his gaze on his daughter, scrutinizing her as if weighing the truth she could bear. The mountains defeated them. A sudden, savage storm, a precipitous temperature drop that our equipment couldn't withstand. The men, accustomed to modern technology, found themselves betrayed by it. GPS units froze. Radios fell silent. They couldn't navigate without electronic aids. They couldn't read the land's elemental signs. His voice, and its bitterness, held a keen edge. All that rigorous training, all those considerable resources, and they perished because they never mastered the rudiments. Eleanor stared at her father, discerning, for the first time, glimpse of the profound anguish he carried. That's why you teach me all this, she articulated, apprehension dawning like a cold sunrise. The tracking, the weather signs, how to navigate without a compass. Mr. Hayes nodded. The modern military's paramount frailty is its over-minded reliance on technology. When it inevitably fails, and it always can, one must possess ancient wisdom. He placed a hand on her shoulder, his expression intense. Technology is ever mutable. The wilderness remains immutable. Survival precepts have endured for millennia. As they loaded the deer meat onto their sled, Mr. Hayes continued his rare moment of self-revelation. After the Highlands, I couldn't remain within the system's rigid confines. I sought refuge here, where the rules are simpler, harsher, perhaps undeniably honest. He surveyed the snow-draped landscape. Nature doesn't dissemble. It makes no false promises. It simply is. You either learn to abide by its terms, or you don't. That evening, within their small farmstead, Eleanor should have been deep in slumber. Instead, she overheard her father on the shortwave radio. He spoke in hushed tones with someone he addressed as General. Eleanor recognized the formal military cadence her father adopted during these infrequent calls, a stark contrast to his usual demeanor. Indeed, sir, she exhibits genuine promise. and natural instincts I haven't witnessed before. Yes, even at this tender age, I comprehend the program parameters. But this is different. Eleanor lay in her modest bed, a whirl of questions vexing her. What program did they speak of? Why did her father sound so defensive about her? The conversation receded. They hushed for her to decipher further words, but the unmistakable tension in her father's voice lingered. She didn't know then that this clandestine exchange would, with inexorable certainty, shape her life's trajectory somewhere. Within Whitehall's hallowed halls, a file bearing her name had been initiated. It was part of a project so classified that most military personnel remained ignorant of its existence. For years later, the defining moment arrived. Stark and unforgiving. 14-year-old Eleanor accompanied her father on what should have been a routine hunting expedition into the remote Penningway. By then, Arthur Hayes had instructed his daughter in increasingly advanced wilderness skills. He treated her less as a child and more as a trusted apprentice. Eleanor had become proficient with firearms, could navigate by celestial bodies, and possessed dozens of methods for procuring sustenance and water in the most challenging environments. They embarked early on a blustery February morn, the temperature a relatively mild 14 degrees Fahrenheit. Their intent was to track red deer through a familiar stretch of ancient woodland, some 15 miles from their secluded farmstead. The meteorological forecast had promised clear conditions, but Mr. Hayes, with sagacious counsel, had taught Eleanor never to fully trust such predictions. Observed the clouds to the north-west. Mr. Hayes indicated as they snowshoed through a small clearing. Note how they accumulate, moving faster than the report suggested. Eleanor studied the horizon. A front approaches. More robust than anticipated. Precisely. We may need to cut this excursion short. It continued for another hour. Mr. Hayes asked, concerned deepening with the discernible shift in the weather. He finally made the prudent decision to turn back. Yet they had ventured farther than initially intended, following a promising game trail. Then, the storm struck with unexpected ferocity. It was a polar system of the kind that, throughout Britain's wildest regions, had claimed countless lives. The temperature plummeted 20 degrees in a single hour. Visibility diminished to near zero. The wind drove ice particles that stung like needles against exposed skin. Mr. Hayes checked his GPS unit, then frowned as the screen flickered and died in the extreme cold. Electronic reliability threshold.
Please,
He muttered,
let us be
referencing the
found.
lesson he taught Eleanor about technology's inevitable failure below critical temperatures. They'll navigate by the old ways now. They pressed on through the blinding snow. Mr. Hayes broke trail while Eleanor followed closely. Her young heart, a tempest of anxiety and grim determination. The terrain grew increasingly unfamiliar. Whiteout conditions obliterated all recognizable landmarks. Mr. Hayes paused frequently, checking their position using natural indicators and his trusty backup compass. He was reversing a frozen lake when disaster struck. Swift and merciless, the ice, treacherously weakened by unseen sub-minus surface currents, fractured beneath Mr. Hayes' feet. Eleanor watched in frozen horror as her father plunged through the surface, vanishing into the frigid water. "Father!" she shrieked, dropping to her belly and crawling with frantic haste towards the gaping hole. Hayes resurfaced, gasping. The shock of the icy water already took its toll. "Stay back," he commanded, his voice raw. "The ice is compromised." Eleanor, her terror eclipsing all reason, ignored him. She continued her cautious approach. Hayes grasped the ice shelf's edge, but each desperate attempt to pull himself out caused further fracturing. "Eleanor, listen to me," he urged, his teeth chattering. "You must reach that stand of pines we passed. The oldest shelter. I'll join you once I extricate myself." I won't abandon you, Eleanor cried, her hand reaching for her emergency rope. That is an order, Mr. Hayes' voice adopted a commanding tone she rarely heard, one that brooked no arguments. I can manage this. Your succumbing to hypothermia benefits neither of us. Eleanor hesitated. Then, with a crushing weight of reluctant understanding, recognized the cold logic. With the storm intensifying and her father in dire peril, adding herself to the risk would only worsen their predicament. She committed the precise location to memory, noting a distinctive, lightning-minus scarred rowan tree on the shoreline. I'll build the shelter by that split pine. Follow my tracks when you emerge. Mr. Hayes nodded, already working to distribute his weight. Striving to prevent further ice collapse, Eleanor backed away, fighting every instinct screaming at her to remain with her father. The storm, a hungry maw of weight, swallowed her as she moved toward the tree line. Her last agonizing glimpse showed Mr. Hayes methodically breaking the ice toward the shore, a solitary figure against the encroaching oblivion. Eleanor reached the venerable pines and immediately implemented the survival techniques her father had. With such prescience instilled in her, she used her snow knife to cut blocks for a rudimentary shelter. She meticulously constructed a small emergency fire, using materials from her waterproof survival kit. She established a visual marker, a brightly colored scarf tied to a prominent branch that her father might spot in the maelstrom. As absolute darkness descended and temperatures relentlessly dropped, she maintained the precious flame. She periodically called out toward the lake, her voice a fragile offering against the wind's howl, helping to guide Mr. Hayes to her position. He never came. By morning, Eleanor confronted the horrific reality her father was, in all likelihood, either perished or severely hypothermic. The relentless conditions rendered any search impossible. She was utterly alone in a raging blizzard with gravely limited supplies. The logical course of action, she knew, would be to reach their farmstead or find other assistance. But that meant abandoning her father. Truthfully, by some miracle. Still clinging to life, Eleanor made the agonizing decision to wait one more day. She meticulously maintained her shelter and the flickering signal fire. If Mr. Hayes had survived the initial immersion, he would, as planned, take his way to her position. If he didn't appear by the following morning, she would be compelled to attempt the perilous journey home alone. That day stretched into an eternity. Each passing hour diminished the fragile tendrils of hope. Eleanor occupied herself by improving her makeshift shelter, carefully rationing her meager provisions, and setting simple snares in the surrounding area. When a snowshoe hare, with serendipitous fortune, was caught in one of her traps, she skinned it with the same precise technique her father had taught her. His voice, as if from a profound depth of memory, guided each cut. The animal tells you where to cut, if you listen closely. Night descended once more. Still no sign of Mr. Hayes. Eleanor allowed herself a brief, desperate period of tears. Then, with a fierce internal command, she forced her emotions into abeyance. Survival, she knew, demanded clear thought, not the paralyzing indulgence of grief. On the third morning, a frigid dawn broke across the desolate landscape. Eleanor prepared to depart. She had waited longer than prudent, driven by unyielding loyalty and a fragile, desperate hope. Now, she faced a 15-mile journey through unfamiliar territory and unrelenting storm conditions. She packed her minimal gear, prominently marking her shelter location. It was a final, poignant gesture in case Mr. Hayes was still alive and, against all odds, searching for her. The journey that ensued would, years later, become legendary among the most experienced wilderness experts of the British Isles. 14 year, old Eleanor navigated through a severe blizzard, relying solely on rudimentary tools and the profound wisdom of natural indicators, when her compass, near a vein of mineral deposit, yielded erratic readings. She precisely identified her location by meticulously studying snow deposition patterns on tree trunks. When her emergency rations dwindled, she ingeniously set impromptu traps that yielded small game. When nightfall threatened her with mortal peril of exposure, she constructed a snow cave that maintained survivable temperatures throughout the long, dark hours. Most remarkably, on the second day of her solitary journey, she managed to fell a young red deer with her hunting rifle. This provided desperately needed sustenance and materials, utilizing every part of the animal. As her father had taught, Eleanor fashioned improved insulation for her boots from its hide, consumed its liver for critical nutrients, and used its sinew to repair her snowshoe bindings. On the fourth day following the initial separation,